Hello everyone, this is Christopher O'Hara, but you can call me Chris. In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you my digital photo workflow. This is a broad overview of how I edit my images, as well as talking about some of the plugins and applications I use to enhance and correct my photographs. My goal is to give you a better understanding on how you would approach your own digital workflow, as well as provide some information on some creative tools that may enhance your own photographs. Now, if you're just starting out with digital photography, or if you're looking to get better at post-processing, I teach one-on-one lessons here in San Jose, California, and I also teach live lessons over the internet via Skype. Private lessons are a great way to help cut through the malaise of information on the internet. Studying photography one-on-one with me will help speed up the learning process and allow you to unleash that inner artist. Not to mention, it's a lot of fun. I can guarantee you're going to have a blast. I have more information on my website at www.christopher-o'hara.com. Let's get started. I have two types of workflows. I have a basic workflow and I have an advanced workflow. Both workflows consist of Lightroom as my starting point. I think of Lightroom as the brain to all my photographs. It does importing, it does exporting, it does color correction, white balance, noise reduction, black and white. I mean, it does just about everything you can possibly imagine. So you may be wondering, wow, why would I need anything else? Well, you almost really don't. But if you want to get more creative with your images, there's a lot of these great plugins and other applications that you can use to really enhance your images that Lightroom just can't really get to. So, and I'm going to show you a few of those. So in this basic workflow, I start off in Lightroom and I do all my basic edits, white balance adjustments, cropping, and those kinds of things. And if I need to do some subtle touch-up work on the image, I will jump over to Photoshop, do that, and then right back into Lightroom to finish everything off. And I leave it at that. I kind of keep it simple. When I need to crank out some images really quick, this is basically my workflow. Sometimes I don't even get into Photoshop. I can do everything within Lightroom. Now on the advanced workflow, it's a little bit different. I may go into a lot of different directions, but they both start off with Lightroom, and again, that's my kind of brain or my central location for all my images. Now let's say if I want to process some HDR, I have two areas that I may take my images. One which would be in HDR FX Pro by Nik Software, and another one is called Photomatix, and they both produce really good HDR images, but they're a little bit different, and so I recommend trying both of them out if you can. And I know there's some other ones out there in the market which I'm sure are really good, but these ones I found produce the kind of results that I'm looking for with my HDR photography. The next step would be noise reduction, and sometimes this is the first step, but generally in HDR photography I apply my noise reduction after I merge the photos. But if I'm not doing HDR, I assess the image whether it needs noise reduction. Every image has noise in it, but some just need that extra reduction. I use two different types of applications. I use Define by Nik Software, and I also use Denoise by Topaz. Kind of a general difference between these two is Define is very precise but quick, where Denoise has a lot more parameters and allows you to adjust the noise reduction based on channels like blue channel, red channel, luminance channel. So you can get very specific on how you want to apply noise reduction. Both work really well, and I'm going to show these in a later tutorial. Now if I want to do black and white, I will use Silver Efex Pro. It's a great plugin for Lightroom, and it just produces really incredible black and white prints. And if you're used to doing black and whites, you'll be right at home within this application because there's a lot of kind of standardized black and white tools that are built right into Silver Efex Pro. You'll get some amazing results with that. If I'm doing color stuff, I may jump into Color Efex Pro by Nik Software, and this is a plugin for Lightroom as well. But this program is more of, it's kind of a nice to have. It's not an essential plugin that you have to edit your color photographs. It's kind of a nice plugin to add some creativity to your images. So I would definitely check it out. It does some great things with filters and things like bleach bypass or solarization or cross processing. It also has some nice contrast filters built into it. So definitely check that out. Another application I'm starting to use is Perfect Photo Suite by On1 Software. And this is interesting because it's almost like trying to take the place of Photoshop, or at least from a photographer perspective. And what I mean by that is Photoshop can do so many different things in that, but how a photographer uses Photoshop is very different than a designer, and both professionals can use Photoshop, and where Perfect Photo Suite is more geared towards the photographer. So all the kind of photographer filters and tricks and stuff that you would use in Photoshop have been kind of simplified and packaged into this Perfect Photo Suite. A couple things that I really like in Perfect Photo Suite are the borders that you can create, or the blur feature, or texture, and some of the film effects that you can create right within Perfect Photo Suite. Sometimes I will use Perfect Photo Suite after Photoshop, which is the next kind of point in my workflow. Photoshop can go in a lot of different places in my workflow based on what the image needs. So for instance, if I need to clean up an image, maybe there's things in the image I want to get rid of, or just basic color adjustment, I will usually start off with Photoshop, and then I'll go into some of these other applications like silver effects and color effects. Now, let me say this, getting back to the noise reduction. Noise reduction is usually really early on in my processing, and it's because when you apply noise reduction later on, it doesn't always produce the same kind of results. However, there are times where I do apply noise reduction towards the end, and it's usually because after I'm doing a lot of this editing, there's parts of the image that have, or some of the plugins have enhanced the noise in the image, and I need to take that down a notch. So sometimes there's a couple points where I use noise reduction. So let me get back into this Photoshop area. So again, I do all my heavy lifting right within Photoshop. And in addition to using Photoshop, I have some plugins built into Photoshop that I love to use and which help kind of boost the image. For instance, Topaz. Topaz has several different plugins that you can use, and one in particular that I love to use is Topaz Adjust. It's an amazing plugin, and it just seems to make your images pop like nothing else. And I love using a lot of the presets right within Topaz Adjust. There's some other ones that I occasionally use, like Clean, Simplify, and Detail, and they all have kind of their own unique twist, and I'll kind of get into those in a later tutorial, and you can see how and why you would want to use some of these different types of plugins. The next step is sharpening. Every photograph kind of needs a certain amount of sharpening, with the exception of JPEGs. JPEGs has correction built into the image, whether it's contrast, white balance, saturation, and sharpening. And so that's why I like to shoot RAW. RAW doesn't have any of those things included in the image. So if you're shooting RAW, you'll need to apply some amount of sharpening if you want kind of that real crisp kind of look to your image. So I use two different applications. I use Sharpener Pro by Nik Software, which is a plugin for Lightroom, or I will use Photoshop to do my sharpening. And there's several ways you can sharpen an image in Photoshop, and I'll show you how to do that in a later tutorial. Next up is resizing. So after I've done my sharpening, I will resize my images. Now sometimes you may want to actually sharpen your image after resizing. Sometimes you can kind of get away with it doing before. So it's you kind of have to experiment with that. And there's different debates on that. So try it out. You have to kind of experiment to see if it produces the kind of results you want. But let's assume that I've sharpened my image and now I need to resize it. Now, if I need a quick way of resizing my image, I'll just use Lightroom. Now, if I need to be very specific on the size of the image and the proportions, I will use Photoshop. Photoshop is much easier, and it's much more detailed on reducing the size of your image. And here's one little note, that when you resize an image, especially for web, if the image is really not the correct size, what can happen is that wherever you're uploading your image to, they will resize it using their own algorithms, and sometimes those aren't the best. So if you like to put images on Facebook a lot, and if the images are too big, it's going to downsize that image, and a lot of times can change the way it looks. So be careful. It's important to get the right image sized and for the medium that you're delivering to. Okay, so here's a basic overview of, or kind of a macro look at my workflow. So you can see Lightroom is kind of in the center point. And if I need to be creative, I'll go up to Color Effects Pro or Silver Effects Pro, and you can see where my define noise reduction is attached to Lightroom, and also the HDR stuff. And at the bottom there, we have texture, blur, and border is usually how I use that Perfect Photo Suite. Now, if I do some editing and resizing and sharpening, I jump over to Photoshop, and within Photoshop, I may use Topaz denoise, and I also will use that Topaz adjust. So this is kind of, like I said, it's kind of a macro look and workflow of all the applications that I use for my processing. So there you go. Thanks for watching, guys. And again, check out my website for more information. And if you want to sign up for private lessons, look forward to hearing from you. And hopefully we can connect and talk about this wonderful world of photography. I love it, and I just can't get enough. And I love sharing this information with as many people as possible. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.